So let's start this video by talking about a single word. Value. See, the Model 2 Genesis I grew up with came with a multi-cart called the 6-Pack. As a pack-in, it was, of course, obviously free. It came with 6 of Sega's older games for the platforms, some of which still hold up today, such as Revenge of Shinobi and Streets of Rage. And I would really only consider 2 of them not worth going back to, the first of which being Columns, and the second of which is... Look, I'm not talking about Sonic until June, okay? Just no. Of course, being a pack-in has made it extremely common, and more importantly to today's topic, very cheap. About 5 to 20 bucks. Which, coincidentally, is about the same price you'll normally pay for today's video topic, Yakuza 0. And I know what you're thinking. Hey, an actual intro, is this a way to get around YouTube swear detection? Oh yeah, absolutely it is. Though, I do think it is safe now, so let's get into Yakuza 0. Alright, so the structure for this one is going to be a little bit weird. Because see, I consider Yakuza 0 one of the best values you can get for money before I go into anything else. So how I'm going to be structuring this is first, I'm going to focus on what you get for that 20 or 5 bucks depending on if it's on sale or not. And then after that, I'll give you a spoiler point as I go through the story of Yakuza 0 because despite everything the game tacks onto itself, it's still got a pretty engaging crime drama in it as well. So let's get back on script. Let's focus on just how much content you get when you get Yakuza 0. Honestly, the sheer amount of content in Yakuza 0 is a part of why it's one of my most played games, and actually now I'm curious. What are my other most played games? Oh gods, that's just sad. No, I don't want to talk about this one. I actually want to enjoy making this video. Now there's some complicated feelings if I ever had them. And while I'm not going to count VR chat because that's more of a social application than a game, yeah, Yakuza 0 is right below it. Though if you want me to be pedantic, there are things off of Steam that I have played more than Yakuza 0. I distinctly remember as a kid having pumped almost 400 hours into Tales of Symphonia, and if we want to take my Switch and itch.io games into account, I don't know, Zero Ranger's Switch port and Void Stranger's itch.io release, yes, I bought it twice. We're getting off track here. Let's get into the sheer amount of side game content within Yakuza 0. Everything that makes the playtime you saw earlier what it is. So with Yakuza, a lot of these minigames tend to be extremely in-depth, oftentimes tying to their own little side missions. Which, don't you worry, while I don't want to spoil them all, I will get to the side missions. So it only makes sense that with listing all of this off, I start with what's, well, the most threadbare. While there is a friendship quest tied to it, you could at least play emulated versions of Space Harrier and Outrun. Now, it should be noted that I don't think these are the best way to play these games, but that is a story for another day. However, the emulation itself is handled by M2. For those of you that don't know, if M2's name is tied to an emulated re-release, then it's usually going to be somewhere between acceptable to great. Next up is Mahjong, which I admittedly do not have the patience for, but it's pretty adept and take my word for it. I've known people who have genuinely gotten into Mahjong from the Yakuza series. I mean, next is the batting cage, and I've not spent much time on the batting cage. There's a version of it that I do personally like better, but hey, it's here. There's also a personal real-life favorite of mine in bowling. And for being something that's not Wii bowling, it's honestly pretty good and pretty fun. There's also a little bit of a meme tier reward you get as you go along bowling, but let's not get into that. Next, we've got karaoke, and let me just tell you, trying to do this on an 8-bit Do Ultimate, which means that the inputs are reversed from what's on my actual controller, is kind of hellish. This pains me because I love rhythm games, even if I'm not as diehard as, some people are. But if you do well enough in these silly little animations you get are absolutely worth it, especially Majima's. There's also some mini-games that I don't feel comfortable showing, and one of them is catfighting that is just rock, paper, scissors. It's just that the skin the catfighting is wearing is kind of saucy, so let's just say that it exists. Additionally, this does mean I'll be glossing over the video stuff as well as the phone clubs. There's also bar games in some of the bars, which I'll admit I'm better at in real life than I am through a video game. I tend to be reasonably good at pool in real life, but I can't play video pool to save my fucking life. There is also an extremely in-depth slot car minigame / side quest. Though the downside to some of the customization is some of the parts you get that, while this game was console only, were DLC if I recall correctly, but are just baked into the Steam version, kind of break it a bit. Sure, there's a cost limit, but that doesn't really do much. But hey, I like slot cars, so this sort of mode is absolutely welcome in my books. There's also the games that are more explicitly specific to each character. With Kiryu, it's Real Estate Magnate Simulator, and with Majima, it's Cabaret Club Manager Simulator. These kind of try to serve as the main side game for each character as well as an income generator, and oftentimes doing each character's side stories will contribute to these. Oftentimes with more staff members so you can perform better in these games. Though, let's put a pin in side stories. That kind of deserves its own section. And you know what? We haven't gotten into the main gameplay loop yet. The main gameplay loop of Yakuza is a 3D beat-em-up. While we will come back to this point when I eventually get around to doing Kiwami, but for now, know that the main loop is switching between 3 styles, 4 if you go for 100%, in order to take out a large swath of foes. You know, the Yakuza, goons of other sorts, delinquents, all that stuff. Though, I am not going to dignify the upgrade system other than acknowledging the fact that it is a pun on investing in yourself. And this ties into the final minigame that I can get into off the top of my head. Underground Arena Fighting. It's exactly what it says on the tin, a best of 3 where you try to take down 3 opponents. And while I've sure spent a good chunk of time on minigames, there's probably stuff I've outright forgotten to mention. Like, Yakuza 0 is fucking dense. It is jam-packed with content. But we've got to move on to the rest of the game. So with that out of the way, let's go into side stories. So side stories are a little brevity, a little slice of life that happens in between the main plot. And I don't mean slice of life in the way that, well, would turn me off because I kind of hate that genre of animation. This is the more unhinged type of life, where things just happen to you and you roll with it. For the sake of avoiding, say, spoiling everything, I'm just going to give 2 of my favorites, one for each character. And if you can't tell from the B-roll footage I'm currently using, we're starting with the one I'm doing for Majima, which is of course, Majima goes undercover in a cult. Though I am not covering it for the reason that a specific GIF meme comes from here. I'm more covering it because it's fascinating all on its own. You see, Yakuza 0 is set in the 80s! So there are a lot of both love letters and jabs at specific events that happened within Japanese history at that time, and this is one of them. Because see, on the surface, while this is just Majima goes undercover in a cult in order to get to someone who's been swayed by them, the cult itself is a fascinating reference. I'm not gonna even try pronouncing that, hell no. But they're a big analog to Japanese doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo. which in the late 80s and early 90s was actually hitting its stride. It's one of those Japanese types of cults that mix like Buddhism and all sorts of other religions together and then just claim that, hey, our leader is just all the leaders at once. It's Jesus and Buddha. And while I am drastically oversimplifying things, I will say there is quite a rabbit hole that could be gone into with them. Especially since a scathing parody game got made by, and I shit you not, the developers of Hong Kong 97. But a lot of the Japanese have quite the chip on their shoulder with regards to Shinrikyo because of a little something that happened. You see, Shinrikyo was responsible for releasing a bunch of sarin gas on a train. And while YouTube will flay me alive if I tell you what type of attack it is, I can go into detail and say that sarin gas is very not good for people to, say, be around. Hence a resentment towards the group, which has rebranded as Aleph until this very day. So of course, the Yakuza 0 analog of them are as kooky as possible. Regardless, the quest itself is quite an easy one. It's a memory game where basically you have to learn the cult's ways to get an audience with the leader. But there's no fail state because as long as you just do the things, you'll get to see the leader anyways. If you were to ask me, which you're watching my video so I'm going to say it anyways, RGG Studio just wanted to have an excuse to have you wail on a legally distinct version of infamous butthopper Shoko Asahara. Regardless, even the ending of the quest goes into a little bit of how cults function. Cults and cult-like movements usually prey on the vulnerable, those who are unhappy with their life, or those who have undergone some great tragedy. In the case of Iori in this game, that was her father's passing away and promising that they could bring her father back, which of course they can't. But if you sell something charismatically enough, people will just eat that shit up. And I should note that it can be as ridiculous as possible, and yes, if you do something with enough charisma, it'll fly past people's BS detector. So while I know sometimes gifs of this specific side quest are used as, you know, small little memes, that's more why I chose this one. I like that RGG did their research. The strange rituals slipped in as if they're everyday occurrences. And, of course, the most important part, the fact that it's obviously all a scam for money. For both its historical relevance with its analogs, as well as the fact that RGG did some good research on how a cult works and was pretty accurate about it, if a little over the top. Just a little, though. Since I went on for so long with regards to the cult side quest, let's keep it short for the one I'm using with Kiryu. It's the damned Yankee side quest, which, yeah, I've got a few things here, but they won't be as time-consuming as the Shinrikyo stuff. The quest itself involves Kiryu guiding a few people with an abandon or to appear more hardcore than they actually are after a performance. While I feel it's best to show it by just letting the dialogue roll, I'll do so, but I'm also going to talk about the term Yankee. Obviously, in America, it's used to refer to a baseball team, the New York Yankees. In other parts of the world, it's usually a derogatory insult towards Americans. In Japan, though, the context is yet again different. Usually it's a term to refer to a specific type of delinquent, usually those that theme themselves after the American stereotype of having blonde hair, in this case usually dyed. It's a more punk-presenting equivalent to something like, say, rockabilly. So let's just set the stage for but a moment. It's the late 80s in Kamurocho, the fictional equivalent of Shinjuku, Tokyo's Kabukicho, a red light district. With the intro scene detailing a young Yakuza beating up a man. Why, you may ask? Well, it's debt collection, of course. All this introduction scene is just a standard debt collection job that absolutely will not come up later. Afterwards, the Yakuza tries talking with his client. Which, yeah, who am I fooling? The young Yakuza is a younger Kiryu. And the loan shark client is being suspiciously generous. We're talking, hey, why don't you quit working for the Dojima family and come work for me, generous. But nah, that won't come to bite Kiryu back in the ass. Regardless, our lad Kiryu gets a message on his pager. Oh gods, I'm gonna need to explain what a pager is despite it being before my time. Okay, so effectively, think of a pager as the precursor to a cell phone. Effectively, a pager can receive simple messages. And while the one I'm showing on screen is obviously capable of showing simple messages in English, well, imagine shoving complex kanji or hiragana on there. And yeah, you're not going to be getting simple messages on these sorts of pagers. So instead, series of numbers with meanings is the order of the day. At times throughout Yakuza 0's story, you're often going to get these little buzzes from your pager to direct you where to go. Oftentimes from the character that you're going to go meet up with. In this case, it's Nishikiyama, Kiryu's sworn brother. Regardless though, Nishiki and Kiryu wind up heading towards a karaoke bar. And once there, Nishiki goes on a spiel about appearances being extremely important for a Yakuza. That even if you haven't made it yet, there's small little things you can do to make yourself seem more important than you actually are. The really funny thing is in this day and age, people wind up seeing through that sort of thing all of the time. Like that one crypto weirdo who wound up basically getting fact-checked into oblivion about the fact that he was using rentals to look bigger than he was. After that is the karaoke minigames tutorial, which I already covered that in the minigame section, so let's speed it up a little bit. Regardless, most of Nishiki and Kiryu's bar hopping is kinda kept off screen, and the next time we see them is during the break of the morn. But it turns out the guy whose debt you collected, well, he's dead, so you know what that means. Your ass just got framed for murder. Wait, wrong sound effect. Of course, with this being a sanctioned collections job and the murder being all over the news, well, the Dojima family lieutenants call Kiryu into the office. Enter the three said Dojima family lieutenants, Kuze, Shibusawa, and Awano. And while this is a tangent, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the way that Yakuza rather iconically introduces most of its major characters. And honestly, I'd kind of be not doing it justice if I didn't talk about how Yakuza introduces each of its major characters. The sudden grayscale, the sound effect, the red Ito SZ font text with the white outline, it's just all mwah, chef's kiss, perfect. You could introduce almost anything in that style and it would be slightly more dignified no matter how embarrassing the introduction is. Don't believe me? Well, let's try this. With that bout of shitposting out of the way, the three lieutenants are pretty much, hey, you fucked up, kid. Because obviously, if someone dies right after you just collected a debt from them, it kinda looks like you maybe murdered the guy. So with suddenly all eyes on him, Kiryu decides to handle this the only way he knows how. By punching his way to the man who hired him. But when he gets there, what does he find but Kuze coming to join them? And one of the things about the Yakuza is that, you don't fuck with the higher-ups. So our boy goes home empty-handed. A thing that should be noted is Kuze's motivation. Everybody is after the empty lot, a piece of land where no one really knows who the owner is. Because of the attempts to modernize Kamurocho, this lot is incredibly invaluable and could sell for a lot of money, so it's pretty much a race to see who can get it. The 3 lieutenants won it because bringing that much money into the Dojima family, well, that's gotta guarantee them the seat of the captain. A seat currently held by Kiryu's, it's a bit more complicated than that, but let's just say adoptive father. Kuze seems to think that Kazuma, said quote-unquote adopted father, seems to have an idea of where the owner of the empty lot is. So with Kiryu and shit hotter than the Taco Bell experience, he tries to cut a deal and Kiryu refuses. Kiryu's a loyal lad. Regardless, Kazuma's right hand Kashiwagi wants to see Kiryu, so one shot of low poly food later. Effectively, to make a long story short, because trust me, this game's story is long. There is so much packed into this game plot-wise that, you know what, if you need to, go ahead, pause it right here, go grab a snack, go take care of whatever business you need to. Just strap in. But effectively, Kashiwagi lays out, well, what I already said about the empty lot. Especially since Kiryu's one of Kazuma's boys, this puts Kazuma himself at a pretty great risk. Because it is pretty assumed so far that Kuze is the one that set Kiryu up. And this all carries the risk of Kazuma, well, getting expelled from the Dojima family as a whole. And with the fact that you really don't want to go against your superiors in the Yakuza, Kiryu decides on an insane but, well, working enough plan. He's going to gun for a way to retire from the Yakuza. Given he's only 3 years into his oath, this pretty much sends everyone into a panic. But, you know, Kiryu's just stubborn like that. So at first, he's dealing with Kuze, who pretty much says, "The fuck are you doing? You come here with nothing, and you're just asking to leave?" So for a while, like any good gang, they're just like, okay, let's just fucking kill him, leave his body as a message. How are we gonna do it? But then, as Kiryu taunts him, Kuze says the magic words.
てめえは組み抜けたんだろうが。
確かにそうだ。その言葉、待ってたぜ。
I love exact words, don't you? And of course, there's only one way Kiryu can ever get out of this mess. So as we endure this onslaught to reach Kuze, we're kind of introduced to a running thing throughout the series. Because, well, as you can see, some of the stuff that Kiryu does is pretty brutal, but it's okay. You could show this shit to a baby because... After that, it's time for an obligatory boss battle with Kuze himself. It's actually quite easy, especially since the brawler style lets you counter with ease. Yeah, see, that's kind of one of the balancing issues that Yakuza 0 has that I didn't want to mention. At the least, not at the time. While you will want to pour money into upgrading stuff like your strength and your health, by the same token, Brawler's counter is so strong that I've gone the entire game just spamming it. Regardless, at the end of the fight, Dojima himself as well as the other 2 lieutenants pretty much call him out on, you let him go of the family and you just try to murder a civilian. That's kind of one of the extremely hell-no things to do, so Kuze is thus made to perform Yubetsume. Yubetsume, and I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right, I am trying, is in fact that ritualistic rite of cutting off one's finger, or rather, a portion of one's own small finger. It is in effect an extreme act of penance and accountability for an act that would be considered extremely damaging. It is noted on some places that in the past, such a thing was also used as an alternative payment for gambling debts as well. Regardless, even though Kiryu gets to leave the family as Dojima must honor the word of his lieutenant, that's not the end of things. Kazuma's ass is still on the line for the whole thing, so yeah, Kiryu didn't accomplish much other than becoming a civilian. As a result, the poor lad breaks once he's outside. However, a strange man named Tachibana offers Kiryu help, thus marking the end of Chapter 1. So let's roll some B-roll for just a second. A lot of these games are pretty dense in story, and while I am doing my best to condense as much of it as possible, it is still going to be quite beefy. This is mostly while characters and circumstances and so forth are introduced, but I at least did want to address it while we're in that sort of state. Alright, with that out of the way, let's continue. Chapter 2 begins with said man, Tachibana, pretty much just laying out, hey, I knew Kazuma, you want to work with me, Kiryu, to try to get your name cleared. Obviously, this sounds too good to be true. Like, obviously Tachibana has done his research, but, you know, Kiryu is still wary. While both talking with a very relieved Nishiki, as well as a few other people, he kinda finds out that Tachibana Real Estate's methods are pretty brutal. And I don't mean in the using muscle kind of way only. They hire the homeless population to squat, be menaces, piss in the halls, do all sorts of disorderly things. The real estate firm is also shown to be just completely and utterly willing to just increase the pay, make the package sweeter for anyone who they're buying off of. After both doing your own independent research and just running fetch quests for homeless men that got hired by Tachibana before, it's time to go back to the real estate office. Except because Oda is a paranoid twit who doesn't trust you, it's more time to go punch your way through the office. Afterwards, it becomes a giant conversation about wanting to wrest the control of Kamurocho away a little bit from the Tojo clan, as well as the fact that Tachibana knows Kazuma. Kiryu, possessing this mythical quality called brain cells, asks Tachibana for evidence. In response, Tachibana provides a locket with a photo of Kiryu, Nishiki, and Kazuma himself. Additionally, Tachibana states that the whole thing was arranged about half a year ago before Kazuma went to prison. At that point, with their alliance cemented, Chapter 2 ends. And Chapter 3 brings us to our first character switch. At this point in the game, every 2 chapters, you'll switch characters from Kiryu to Goro Majima, everybody's favorite meme lad before he becomes, well, the unhinged lad that we saw during the Dead Souls video. Now, we're going to paint the backdrop of where most of Majima's gameplay takes place. Is this an excuse to let as much as I can of Majima's intro play? Absolutely, it's a great intro. So most of Majima's tale takes place in Sotenbori, the fictional equivalent of Dotonbori. I know. It's such a drastic change compared to Kabukicho and Kamurocho. But regardless of if you're talking about the fictional place or its real-life counterpart, both are in Osaka City in the Osaka Prefecture. Man, this makes me think of every time in America whenever the county and the city names are the same. However, the real-life Dotonbori is known as an entertainment district. However, while Kabukicho is known as a red light district, Dotonbori is more well known for its food. But it is the 80s, so we're more dealing with cabaret clubs and the like for this one. But I think I've stalled enough because all this lead up is for what I call the golden poster child of tutorials. It is only only a tutorial to show you how Majima's heat actions are different from Kiryu's, but the setup, the style, it just knocks everything out of the park.
一丁景気のやれや
I know I'm a bit of a hypocrite for going on about Video Below and just showing large chunks of this intro, or rather tutorial intro, but holy shit, it's so perfect, especially for the character that they're portraying. It's loud, it's bombastic, it's in your face. It's also a perfect contrast to Kiryu's intro, being a debt collection job followed by a night on the town with the guys. Or one guy. Sorry, Nishiki. Here, Majima showing his showmanship and just being a beautiful troll. Sure, he's being a more hinged troll than most people who have played the other games would be used to, but come on, this is still great. To top it all off, Majima, at the end of all of this, just turns the situation around. He makes a plea that sweetens his own pockets by basically just saying, hey, why not just buy everyone a drink and we'll let you off the hook? Far more eloquently and in a lot more showman talk than my paraphrasing asks, but still, it makes it look like Majima's on top of the world, the Lord of the Night. Everything from that loud, bombastic intro was just an act. I mean, obviously, no shit, but it comes careening back in a way that reminds you, this is in fact a crime drama. See, Majima's kind of a currently ex-Yakuza trying to get back in the game. He wound up defying a patriarch, and the consequences of which we'll get into later. But being stuck in Sotenbori running the Grand is kind of his punishment. Of course, Sagawa, this smug fucking bastard that I can't help but just love to hate. Like, good props to his actor. Because he is modeled after his voice actor, so maybe later. But like any enterprising thug, he just keeps raising the price for, well, convincing his sworn brother to let Majima back into the family. But while he says he's just fucking with the lad, he does offer an alternative. Would you do a hit to get back in? I know I've already said this, but it does still set a wonderful contrast to Kiryu. On a surface level, Kiryu's at rock bottom, framed for murder and on borrowed time, but he's got people willing to help him. And then you have Majima, Sotenbori's Lord of the Night, seemingly everything at his fingertips and being a little bit of a living legend. But it's all a facade, and, well, Sagawa, the only person that's around for Majima right now, why would he let his cash cow go? Right now, Majima's just being exploited. Exploited on a dream that may never come true. A dream that baffles even his captor. Luckily for me, I could skip the rest of this chapter because it's the exciting world of business! Yeah, after that it kind of goes into the serious again. We see Majima have a nightmare about, well, disobeying his patriarch and getting sent to a black site. Or as they call it, the hole. I'm not gonna state exactly what Majima was ordered not to participate in. It pertains to later games. But it is here to show why Majima is ex-Yakuza. Which, whew, this boy's already been through the ringer. So once Majima wakes up, the owner pretty much just, hey, come meet me at a food stand. The discussion that takes place there is pretty much just, I don't understand why you want to get back into the Yakuza when you could have everything you want here. Well, anything a normal civilian would want, but, you know, But then the shoe drops and he pretty much just, oh, by the way, that hypothetical hit question? I wasn't joking, but don't worry. The guy I'm sending you after, Makoto Makimura, is a complete piece of shit, trust me, bro. So Majima goes to the phone club in order to try to get into contact with someone who might have ties to Makoto Makimura. Anyone not alive in Japan during the 80s might be, what's a phone club? To oversimplify it, it's basically a dating service, using those things that you only see in offices anymore. Regardless, at first, the girl that Majima winds up talking to is a little hesitant on telling him anything and almost hangs up. But eventually, our lad gets his date. Clearly, as a reward for such impressive claw machine skills, she does open up about Makoto, leading Majima to believe that maybe the shady, slimy bastard that gave him the mission is possibly lying to him. Regardless, this ends in the only acceptable thing, a tutorial fight. Granted, this is where many twists kick in. See, Majima goes to the office in order to, shall we say, go do the deed, but runs into a blind girl instead who begins screaming, with Majima just saying, "Hey, I wanted to be a customer. If I let you work on me, will you believe me?" Which, when the girl is massaging him, no shit, Majima feels like solidified stress incarnate. But a massive man comes in, if you haven't been able to tell from the thumbnail. And they scrap, if you also haven't been able to tell from the thumbnail. Look, Yakuza 0 produces some unintentionally hilarious screenshots at times. But after the two scrap, well, a bunch of Yakuza thugs wind up just pouring in and wind up shooting the large man. Why Hen Li? It turns out that the blind girl? Yeah, that's the actual Makoto Makimura. Regardless, the chapter ends with Majima holding the poor blind Makimura close to him, and, well, of course we gotta have a cliffhanger, you know? Luckily for me, chapter 5 is very brief and easily summarized. It's just Kiryu learning about the ins and outs of Japanese real estate. Which, if you can't tell, Kiryu's look in this game is not drip-tastic. Though I will note that this is how you unlock Kiryu's unique minigame. There's still a lot of story to go over here, so I am glossing a little bit over this section as a whole. After that, Oda, Kiryu's boss, winds up, "Hey, so, I've got a spot I like to drink at. Why don't we go grab a couple of drinks?" Leading us to the Serena, as well as, well, Nishiki being there, which means it's time for another karaoke game I'm skipping over. But, you know, this is a crime drama, so good things can't last, and thus Oda comes stumbling into the bar, beaten to shit. Awano shows up, and after a brawl, he kind of gives Kiryu an ultimatum. Either Kiryu gives up Tachibana, and they pretty much just beat the Empty Lots info out of him, or the Dojima family and all of its subsidiaries will start a manhunt for Kiryu. With that, the chapter ends. So with this news, Oda pretty much just fucking lies to Tachibana, to basically have Tachibana hide. Tachibana, though, knows Oda isn't exactly being honest, so he goes to meet Kiryu in the Empty Lot, which is stupid. While I'm trying to keep the tangents to a minimum with this video, by the same token, I have to fucking acknowledge the fact that, you know, Maybe going to a hotly contested piece of land with the person that was suspected of being, committing fucking murder there is potentially a bad idea. Fortunately for both of them, none of the lieutenants right now have this thing called common sense. To be fair, with the earlier threat from Iwano though, they kind of hold true to their word. And with the entire Dojima family hunting after him, you know what that means. What did these Dojima chucklenuts expect? I mean, even though Kiryu doesn't have the reputation he gains, this is fucking someone who already stormed the Dojima family office, as well as stood toe-to-toe with one of your lieutenants. Holy shit! I get that this section is supposed to be serious, an entire Yakuza family hunting Kiryu down, but to me it's just comical. After that, Kiryu elicits help from a stripper who, well, gives him a hand and lets him go through the sewer tunnels. But, come on. Anyone who's played this game knows exactly what sort of gloriously crazy thing is approaching. If not, despite the fact that I've been trying so hard to keep things moving, I'll give you this one. I'll play this one in full.
Cycling.
I mean, come on, I know I edited it a little bit, but I had to show as much of it as I could, because it's one of the most iconic moments of this game. It's even more badass as hell when you remember that Tsube Sume, that whole finger cutting off bit is literally intended to make holding, say, a melee weapon like a sword or a pipe much harder, if not impossible. But everything about this fight is absolutely, positively peak Yakuza. While the fight itself is by no means difficult, it's just the setup. You all saw the insanity of that fucking intro. Just riding in on a motorcycle. The fact that even though completely disgraced, Kuze is still swinging too. Additionally, the sewer fight is entirely lit up by the fucking fallen motorcycle's headlights. It's something so extremely over the top, but presented in this solemn, badass, and serious way. It's the epitome of everything I love about this series. But alas, we must move on past this boss fight. And next it's...
待ってたぜキリア。やっぱクエナギはしくじったな。何をしてるんだあんた。見りゃわかんだろ、踊ってんだよ。
Alright, let's talk about Iwano's voice actor and likeness. Riki Takeuchi, ooh boy. This fucking guy who, at all times, looks like he walks straight out of a Bollywood movie. Whew. He starred in a metric fuckton of Yakuza movies, though, especially those by, Takeshi Niike. I wonder if that name's gonna be relevant to the series again. One of the other things about Riki is, he's kind of an utter goober. I'm obviously not playing the audio because it's likely hella copyrighted, but just look at this. Look at this. It's like some Jekyll and Hyde shit that he has the range to just do this as well as Yakuza movies. I love it. The research I did for this genuinely made me a fan of Riki as a whole. Just like, this man is a treasure. Come on, Japan, you've got a fucking treasure here. In addition, Riki is also quite known for, he has a, known propensity for being able to look past gender, as well as being, able to recognize beauty as beauty like an utter Chad. And some of these stories may have come out because of a specific trade that's mostly legal in Japan, but illegal here? Look, man, I don't trust YouTube with this sort of thing as far as I can fucking spit, okay? Alas, we cannot spend all of our time on Riki. Regardless, Awano pretty much just gives him, hey, look, buddy, boy. You're not getting out of this. There are a bunch of people outside, so come on. You wouldn't want to make someone sad like, say, the people at the orphanage who raised you, right? But Kiryu being a man of honor and Kiryu being Kiryu just says, nah, I'd rather get shot than work with you. And thus calls Awano's bluff. Which was, in fact, a bluff. No Yakuza toughs, no cops, no nothing. Just Nishiki scrambling to pick his sworn brother up. Granted, it's actually to give him the Lenny treatment as a mercy kill. And from what we have seen through Majima's campaign so far, well, Nishiki, despite how extreme his reaction might be, isn't wrong to worry. But Kiryu kind of turns it around, and just like he did with Awano, calls Nishiki's bluff. Kiryu looks Nishiki straight in the eyes and says, hey bro, when you kill me, please use my head to climb your way to the top. And while guns are one of the most impersonal weapons in the world, it's still quite difficult to do anything when someone is staring you straight down, so Nishiki breaks down, cries, and after they hash things out, Kiryu just takes his car and goes back to Kamurocho. With that being the action that wraps up this chapter. Chapter 7 begins with Majima taking Makoto to a warehouse. Specifically as a hiding space, but also trying to get information out of her as to why everyone's gunning for her head. He's also honest about the fact that he got hired to fucking perform a hit on her. I mean, holy shit, Majima, I'm pretty sure doing that kind of shit in Japan in the 80s is still illegal. Regardless, Makoto is not willing to talk about the man with the bat tattoo, pretty much telling Majima to go find Lee. You know, the big guy that got fucking shot. But it's okay, Majima is pretty sure he wasn't hit anywhere vital. Which he then says was a white lie, but hey, I guess we've gotta try to go find him anyways. But he does warn Makoto not to leave the room. It turns out using the warehouse is kind of a favor Majima pulled from the Odyssey's owner. Which, you know, he has the mostly reasonable reaction of anyone who just witnessed someone like Majima taking a girl into the warehouse. Which is pretty much just, dang, fam, you're into some fucked up shit. Any reason I shouldn't go public with it? Majima decides to take this from a business angle, saying, hey, our rivalry is a part of what makes a number go up. He also tells Majima to go investigate cabaret clubs, but that leads into Majima's unique game mode, and we're not focusing on that. Regardless, the search for Lee takes Majima to a mahjong parlor. Ugh. Luckily, we do not, in fact, have to play mahjong, and instead, just have to beat up people. Regardless, Majima prevails in the fight, and well, Lee talks about his fixation with the man on the bat tattoo, and I'm not sure I can go into all of it on YouTube, but to put it in a way that YouTube will not flay me alive for, let's say that the man with the bat tattoo performs some extremely heinous stuff that is illegal yet still performed in many parts of the world. It traumatized her so greatly that it left her blind, which is actually a thing, by the way. Nowadays, it's lumped under conversion disorder. Lee explains that Makoto's motivation is wanting to make sure the same thing never happens to anyone else, but Lee wants to skin the man alive. Regardless, he asks Majima for help, and Majima agrees. Eventually, though, Lee does reach out to Majima while he's at his, well, night job. Though the punks that shot Lee do try to, take revenge on Majima for beating them senseless, and just get beat senseless again. Though the fact that this happens right outside the club kind of makes Segawa question Majima as to, hey, what's going on? So Majima and Lee do in fact meet back up at the Odyssey's warehouse. Though, while there, he knocks Makoto out because he's kind of got a plan for dealing with this whole hit thing. He wants to use an infamous gold digger that looks suspiciously like Makoto in order to serve as a, well, body double. He suggests using methods that just get Majima to outright ask, "Who the hell are you?" So it turns out the giant hulking massive man that knows of many track covering techniques is ex-Triad. Who woulda thunk? Triads are basically the major type of gang over in China. Equivalences I could draw are Yakuza for the Japanese, obviously, but also the Mafia for the US. But, just to make a note of it, the localization kind of winds up simplifying everything to just Mafia. Regardless, Lee explains that he came into contact with Makoto during a raid on a rival org, and that Makoto is so tiny and frail that he just couldn't help but take her and hire her to protect her. And he tells Majima that bluntly, he's willing to do anything to protect Makoto, even kill. That's a line that Majima himself is not quite willing to cross, so he just winds up, fuck this shit, I'm outta here. And as a result, a boss fight ensues. Regardless, in the morning, well, Majima finds out that someone went ahead and did the deed anyways. Because at first, Lee thinks that Majima did the deed all on his own and is just being humble and playing the hero. Well, Majima kind of left the stuff behind in a garbage can, making a pretty rookie mistake. But it's no worry, because the guy that actually did it wants to meet up with Majima at the Grand. You see, he's looking to make a trade with our one-eyed friend. Thus, ending Chapter 7. Luckily for me, Chapter 8 is pretty dang easy to summarize. It starts with Majima meeting his, well, let's for now call him mysterious and unhinged benefactor, Nishitani of the Kijin clan, and that he is in fact the one that pulled off Lee's body double plan. Obviously, he wants Makoto, but he also wants to fight Majima. The nutjob even goes as far as calling the cops on himself. Granted, the cops do come, so Majima is not able to, in fact, beat the answers out of the guy. But the whole thing makes Sagawa quite suspicious. Because see, both Nishitani and Sagawa are both patriarchs for clans within the Omi Alliance. So for him it becomes, hey, why the hell is this guy here? Why is he picking a fight with my boy? In addition, he calls out a few little things. For example, the state of the body itself. The little inconsistencies like, why is the body so mutilated but left in the uniform? It's more like, well, you're trying to call out that Makimura is dead. With pretty much just being, hey, you ain't keeping any secrets from me, are ya, buddy? This prompts Majima to go straight to Lee. But Majima does inform Lee that he can't go with them. That, you know, the place is pretty much his prison. As well as the fact that, even if they do skip town, Makimura is likely gonna live the rest of her life with the target painted right on her back. However, they get interrupted. 1212. You see, the underground doctor not only followed them, but sold them all out. To who, you may ask? Well, the undercover people keeping an eye on Majima, making sure he doesn't skip town. After that, after the doctor gets rewarded like a traitor deserves... After that, as well as an escort mission that I'd rather gloss over, no one likes escort missions, they all prepare to escape when Lee falls for the oldest trick in the book. With Sagawa confirming that, of course, he is the one that set all this up. Give it his usual, hey, come on, buddy, why'd you have to lie to me? I don't want to do something like this. Before taking aim at Majima. Before he just gets fucking shot himself. With the man in white taking Makoto and ending the chapter. You see, Chapter 9 is another easy one to summarize. It starts with Kiryu's apartment just being firebombed. Unfortunately for Kiryu, the search is just ramped up even further. More Dojima clowns just go bursting into places like the Serena now, just to hunt him down. So most of this chapter just turns out to be waves upon waves of enemies pouring out, just all the Dojima clowns. Though the big thing of this chapter is a rematch against everyone's favorite disgraced man. The guy that just doesn't give up. A boss fight with Kuze. And more Dojima clowns, but come on, Kuze's the star here. Why would grunts ever pose a threat, especially when you can just throw shit at them? Though, when Kuze finally has Kiryu on the ropes, well, he kinda just gets run over. Which, you know, it's kind of always funny to see in video games someone just gets smashed with the car and then just get up like it was nothing. But it was Tachibana coming to save Kiryu's ass, so hey, that's a good thing. The rest of this chapter is Kiryu and Tachibana having a long talk about how he believes that the world is use and be used in return. But that Kiryu is not that type of person, and that's kind of made Tachibana trust him. It's as close to a nice and sweet conversation as can be had in the series at this point, but still, it's refreshing. However, at the end of it, Tachibana, passes out. Chapter 10 begins with Tachibana receiving dialysis. 1212. Thanks to a past incident when he lost his hand of taking too long to get a blood transfusion, he needs to come back to Little Asia every now and then to get the aforementioned transfusion. In this case, Little Asia is a space mostly populated by Chinese folk. So when you see a line in square brackets in this game, it is basically being spoken in Chinese. Regardless, in all of this, the Elder, through a proxy, eventually calls for Kiryu and Oda. Well, whenever Kiryu goes meet with Elder Chen, well, you know a conversation is going to be very, very, very cheerful when I put that up, you know I'm broaching something, not pretty. Both this game and a couple of the later ones kind of play around with something that is, well, there in Japan, but also unfortunate. I do not know if this still applies to the Japan of today, but there have been tensions in the past between, well, Japan and some ethnic groups, I'll just put it as for now. In this case, the Chinese. And while the events that, say, people like Wai Hun Lee and Elder Chen speak about are fictional, they are based upon past discrimination that did happen in real life. But I will admit that with Yakuza being a crime drama, well, it's obviously played a lot more for drama. It's a lot more explosive than a lot of real-life cases were. Elder Chen, after describing what has happened to his people, winds up just going over the situation before, hey, we know what's happening with Kiryu and we can't take him in, it's too dangerous. Which, to his credit, Oda does try to get him to budge on, but it's to no avail, and even Tachibana tells him, nah, we'll work this out on our own. So Tachibana and Oda wind up exiting Little Asia with Kiryu, and Kiryu confirms the, Look, I'll bring up certain tensions and such when they're more relevant to the series, okay? Because they can't exactly house Kiryu, they suggest that he go hide amongst the homeless over in West Park. Kiryu does take up their advice and, well, winds up spending the night with the homeless man who just is, treat me to a drink sometime and we'll call it even. But some punk-ass kids come over in the middle of the night, which, you know, they're labeled as homeless hunters. What do you think they're doing? But, you know, it's time for the Kiryu solution to such problems. Just beating the kids up. After all, if the kids want to be thugs, then it's best to teach them what happens to thugs when they mess with someone bigger than them. However, they are grateful enough that they're pretty much just, your name is Kiryu? I mean, no one's gonna sell you out to Dojima after tonight. The next day, Tachibana picks Kiryu up and, well, they try a little gambit. To go further up the ladder than Dojima himself. That would be the current acting head of the Tojo clan. A lot of it is taking, for lack of a better term, gang sociopolitics. Look, any organization, including gangs of any nationality, are always going to have their, well, inherent structures as well as how the gears grind together. So Tachibana's approach becomes pointing out that, sure, Dojima might be a loyal subordinate now, but if he is able to secure the empty lot, and as a result, able to secure enough power to become chairman, well, the long-term effect of such a climb would probably invalidate the efforts of many people who climbed the ladder to the top, especially under a less than savory individual like Dojima. However, when dealing with such matters, words alone are not enough. So Tachibana gives an offering and a proposal. 5 million yen now, and another 5 million whenever Tachibana procures the empty lot, making him, by the 1980s standards, the billion yen man. For fun, let's both adjust that for inflation and put it in American dollars. Because, and this is simplifying it for the sake of my vocal cords, this is $8 million in today's money. So, this makes Kiryu the $8 million man, and to be fair, even the acting chair winds up asking, hey, Kazuma before you, I would have happily paid that much money for. Are you in fact a man worth 1 billion yen? However, while the acting chair likely intends to honor his word, he places one final obstacle. A lot of people to fight through. And with this being a big, major spectacle, you know what that means. While the Dojima boys, mauled about the fact that they can't touch Kiryu anymore thanks to orders from higher up, the real estate crowd just take a breather and go over what they have on paper. Effectively, that the search would lead them to Sotomori, as well as the fact that the Omi Alliance, again, Osaka's own bunch of Yakuza, are on the move. Kiryu, on the other hand, despite not being required to go, promises to go and help. After all, Tachibana just spent 1 billion yen to bail his ass out. Therefore, discarding any other metric, he only sees it as fair to help out Tachibana in such a way. Though, before Kiryu leaves with Oda, they go over one bit of information. Specifically, the owner of the empty lot, a visually impaired woman named Makoto Makimura. So the next chapter just begins with Majima getting the absolute shit beaten out of him. It's a conversation about things not adding up to Majima, but the end result is still the same. Go to the Kijin office and beat the answers out of people. The fight itself is unremarkable, hence why I'm not showing it on screen, but Majima does get the clue to find a corrupt cop named Billiken. While Billiken wants Majima to go through the underground fighting ring, this is really just a glorified tutorial for said game mode. The more interesting part is the story that Billiken tells. Effectively, the story of a kid criminal who got away with a pretty grisly murder, making the dad despair. As well as the tale of the kid that the father had taken in, who took vigilante justice into his own hands. That kid's name was Nishitani, with him not so subtly implying that he's the one that built the underground fighting arena. Afterwards, of course, they get going. So, Majima gets thrown in the clink to go talk with Nishitani, after Billiken bribes the other guard, of course. But, you know what type of game this is, so of course a fight ensues. But, because Majima gave him a good fight, Nishitani spills everything he knows. That the person in white who took Makimura is likely the president of the Nikkyo Consortium, a sort of, shall we say, black ops group for the Tojo clan. Everything they do is underground, so they're not exactly flashing their colors out in the open. As such, a Tojo clan old dog like Majima would have no idea about their existence. And while they're going over the consortium's president, Sarah, Nishitani gives the name of the one who hired him, that being the Dojima family Shibusawa. In this story, Shibusawa was someone that I was intentionally obscuring, because of course some of the foreshadowing used by the game is a little bit too obvious. It kind of is just the tiny things, but they're set up in a way that signifies, hey, this guy is more of a major player than he's presenting himself. But since Nishitani explicitly mentions his name as the one who hired him, yeah, why not mention all this now? Regardless, as Nishitani and Majima exit the cell, Billiken winds up limping over and... ooh, that Uncle B gets me every time. Even those that have chosen to walk the path of a noble monster can indeed have loved ones. 1-2-1-2. Regardless, the other crooked cop reveals that someone has paid him good money to make sure that the other three are dead. But Nishitani gets plugged with a bullet, so he decides to go down swinging and to make sure that at least Majima can get away. with the last shot of the chapter being Nishitani making sure that the backstabbing officer goes down. So chapter 12 begins with Sagawa and Majima catching up, with, Sagawa at first being outwardly friendly and, "Hey, good job, Majima, my boy, that's some initiative," before promptly choking his ass. The first half of it is Sagawa reminding us, the audience, that despite the fact that he's been acting pretty affable so far, he is, in fact, still a Yakuza. And reminding Majima that Sotenbori is still supposed to basically be his prison, a cage, his exact words. Though, after Majima diffuses the whole thing and tells Sagawa that he was coming to report to him, well, instead they wind up exchanging information, along with Sagawa showing some twisted respect for Majima being able to get the information out of Nishitani. In the end, though, both prepare to set off towards where they are, in fact, keeping Makoto, the Benten Inn in Camellia Grove. Once they get there, Majima and Sagawa decide to split up to find Makoto. Though Sagawa seems to take a lot more of a, gun-happy attitude to this whole thing. Which, also another thing to consider, even though these are Yakuza, these are Japanese gangsters. A little thing that I should point out at this point is that Japan is a lot more extreme about its gun laws than anything. Since almost certainly at any single point, any gun you would see carried by a non-officer would be absolutely illicit. It's a little wink and a nod at just how ruthless Sagawa is underneath the surface. And though the consortium try to warn Majima, well, this is a chapter full of fighting and almost nothing else. So he obviously ignores it. Though, if you can't tell from the masks that the consortium are wearing, this chapter gets a bit silly. When Majima does make it to Sarah's pretty upfront with him, actually. He explains that he has entrusted Makoto to an ally of his, as well as more wanting to test Majima's resolve than anything else. And that once he's done personally testing him, then Sarah can give Majima all of the answers he needs, especially since Majima feels strongly enough about this that he's willing to defy Sagawa. Though, I am sorry to disappoint you all that I didn't really get any fun footage during that fight, so we're just skipping right to the next story beat. In the end, after their brawl, Sarah does keep up his end of the word and explains that he gave Makoto to a real estate agent, as well as the fact that she is the owner of the empty lot, which, its billion-yen value, isn't the most important thing. The important thing is that it's a piece of land that prevents an urban redevelopment plan called the Kamurocho Revitalization Project from going through until it's acquired. And while Majima wastes no time in declaring that he has to haul ass to Kamurocho, Sarah does point out that it would put her in danger. Not because of Majima himself, but because of Sagawa. And you know what? Speak of the devil, here comes Sagawa in for the kill. You see, Sagawa rifles through Sarah's suit in order to find, well, Kiryu's business card. On the one hand, this is enough justification to let Majima out of Sotenbori. On the other hand, this means Sagawa is coming with him. And after a scene like that, obviously, this is where the chapter ends. While this chapter does cover Kiryu and Oda taking Makoto into their care, it's a lot of backstory, and I know that's not the highlight. But for the sake of not leaving it out, I will say that it goes into the fact that Tachibana kind of had a rough childhood being half Chinese, half Japanese. But that the gangs never disrespected him, hence his willingness to join up. Regardless, Kiryu learns about the Nikkyo Consortium, Kiryu and Sarah meet, Sarah hands over Makoto, and Kiryu, Oda, and Makoto wind up all preparing to head back to Kamurocho, though Makoto tenses up at hearing Oda's voice. But that leads us into the highlight of this chapter. The highlight is this fucking Virtua Cop segment, where you have to gun down all of Shibusawa's men that are pursuing you and Makoto. Yeah, that just elicits this for the entire time until this segment ends. Honestly, I'm kind of a sucker for this section, cause I kind of like my arcade homages. And Virtua Cop is a pretty underrated one. Honestly, I find it a perfect fit, as the whole style of gameplay meshes really, really well with the Yakuza spectacle. And of course, any over-the-top spectacle isn't complete without a little explosive cherry on top. A little explosive cherry so explosive it makes everything else look tame. But after this bout of Virtua Copping, Oda kind of backstabs Kiryu and Makoto, going as far as telling them they're both going to die there, before Makoto pulls a sword cane that Sarah gave her and just stabs him in the leg. Makoto winds up dropping quite a bit of a bombshell. You see, she almost instantly recognized Oda's voice. So once he got the gun away from Oda, she made sure that he checked for a specific bat tattoo. The one from Majima's story that you might remember Lee mentioning. Though Oda does come out and just say, hey, that was our gang's tattoo as a whole. Though with Oda's time with Tachibana, he eventually found out, hey, surprise, the woman he sold off? Yeah, Makoto is Tachibana's sister. Since he would know how things would go with this whole empty lot business, he became Shibusawa's mole, the reason he went with them to Osaka. After all, to him, he's the only one that knows why he wants Makoto dead, so... After that entire explanation, Makoto still decides to forgive Oda and asks him to come along with them. Though, with being in no condition to move, Oda instead asks for his gun back, giving one last request. With this, he asks Kiryu to tell Tachibana two things. One, that he went out being useful to him. Two, that Oda really loved him. Though, another escort mission later, Shibusawa rewards Oda, let's just say as a failure gets. This chapter ends with Kiryu, well, not exactly giving Makoto a prep talk, but telling her to hold on. Less words of solace over her current circumstances, and more words to just keep going. With her requesting to, in the end, be brought to Kamurocho. So the following chapter begins with Kiryu bringing Makoto to the only place he knows for her to lay low. At first, for good reason, the homeless man in West Park is just like, hey, this is kind of no place to leave a gal, you know? But he does relent because he does kind of owe Kiryu a favor, as well as the fact that Kiryu lets him in that the Dojima family is after Makoto. But he does try to reassure the homeless man that it's just until I bring her brother to her. Though he is growing worried as to why Tachibana is not answering anything. Though it's just because he's getting dialysis. But Kiryu does have to break the news about what happened with regards to Oda. Tachibana uses this news as, well, an opportunity to have a little heart-to-heart with Kiryu. That his time operating within the Chinese gangs kind of made him grow numb to good and evil. That it was seeing the news report that displayed his mother and sister that, well, made him want to guarantee that they'd be safe. And that, well, when Tachibana learned that the little plot of land that had been left to Makoto was worth that much, he turned to Kazuma. Tachibana was worried for his sister's safety, and Kazuma was, well, worried about a man like Dojima gaining more power and influence. If you're wondering a part of what those concerns are, well, we'll get into what sort of man Sohei Dojima is come along. But the important thing is that Kazuma was very much responsible for, well, the birth of Tachibana real estate. But because this is in fact still a crime drama, you know, declaring something happily and with such strong intent is just asking for trouble, and like clockwork, Dojima goons invade Little Asia. After fighting his way through the Dojima thugs, Kiryu gets shot by an assassin named Lao Guai. Lao Guai is, from a localization standpoint, an interesting one. In-game, he's a Chinese hitman, and, well, instead of looking like an utter gonk in China, he is actually modeled after his Chinese voice actor. While I am not quite as familiar with Chinese and Hong Kong cinema as I unfortunately am with North Korean cinema, Sam Lee's filmography is actually kind of damned impressive. But there's also some hilarious whiplash between, well, the group name he was a part of and his solo DJ name. Lazy Motherfucker with an A versus DJ Be Careful, all one word. But back to the plot. Lao Guai is there to basically bring Tachibana in. Kiryu's not in his contract, so, well, Tachibana goes easily. After all, Lao Guai is the most expensive hitman in all of Asia, so yeah. With literally taking a bullet, Kiryu passes out shortly thereafter. But Elder Chen treats Kiryu's wounds. Also, the moment Kiryu wakes up, he's just upfront about the fact that, well, I have my men looking for where they took Tachibana. He also just explicitly states what we already knew from context clues, that Oda was a rat for Shibusawa. Also just Elder Chen just restating his outright disdain for Yakuza for, well, obvious reasons. Regardless, Kiryu does eventually leave the facility. The moment he exits Little Asia, though, he runs into a bunch of Yakuza thugs as well as Nishiki. The thugs obviously think it would be very, very funny if Nishiki and Kiryu duke it out, but Nishiki chooses his brother over the thugs. Once they go back to West Park after beating up a bunch of the thugs, Elder Chen lets them know where Tachibana is being held and warns Kiryu that Kuze is with them. Kuze's crew is trying to, well, torture the information out of Tachibana. And I've at least cut the least YouTube-friendly parts of it out. Kuze realizes that Tachibana is not the type of man that can be broken with torture. This leads to quite a bit of tension between him and his subordinate. You know, the guy that we were beating up during the chapter where Kiryu left the Yakuza. Regardless, one sledgehammer to Tachibana's face and one extremely angry Kiryu later... well, he kind of states that he intends to go on the warpath. Regardless, the chapter closes out with Kiryu letting Makoto hold her brother before he dies. The whole thing shocks her enough that, well, she drops her cane. And thus, she begins crying, trying to deny what has clearly happened. And now it's time for Majima's very, very bad day. Starting with getting yelled at by Segawa, and then people from the family he was erased from noticing that he's in town and wanting to throw hands. Though, after that one, well, Shimano winds up calling Majima in. Though, once Shimano, Majima's former boss, winds up calling them both in, he kinda drops a big reveal. that everything is going according to plan. You see, the reason he got Majima to do the hit is because he knew that Majima couldn't do it. So, Shimano, in all of his infinite wisdom, is effectively telling a man who has been to hell and back with this woman that, well, I hired you because I knew you would fucking suck. Let's just leave out the part about emotional manipulation because that's kind of squick. Granted, Segawa rightfully goes, hey, what the fuck is this about? Though Majima doesn't take it nearly as well. He takes it so fucking badly that he lets random punks beat him up. Not Yakuza, not any suspicious men in black, just fucking punks. So after all of that, Majima just bursts into the Kazuma family office and demands for Nishiki's location. Though Kashiwagi is at the least wise enough to warn his subordinates away from attacking Majima. Unfortunately, he goes at Majima mano a mano. Why? Well, not just to protect Kiryu and Nishiki, but because he's always wanted to see how he'd stack up against Majima. This results in Majima getting the name of the Serena from a rookie and beating up Nishiki, and, well, Nishiki kind of confesses that they have no idea where Makoto even is, that she just walked away from the homeless park they were hiding her at. As well as trying to get confirmation that, well, does Majima mean what he says when he says that he wants to protect her? No matter though, because when Majima goes to investigate the empty lot, he finds Makoto on a roof, with her eyesight recovering and clearly able to look straight at him. Shockingly, the penultimate chapter is actually kinda short. Yeah, let's just blitz through it. Because it starts with Makoto asking Majima to kill Sohei Dojima, and as much as Dojima deserves it, don't worry, we'll get to that later. Remember that Majima was chosen because he's bad at killing things. Okay, cut the music. Makoto goes to the Dojima family alone. What do you think happens? She gets shot and taken to the hospital in critical fucking condition, where it's unknown if she'll ever wake up from the coma she's currently in. All because she thought she could bargain with the empty lot's value for the lives of Dojima's lieutenants. With Sohei Dojima being Sohei Dojima and saying, "Don't fuck with the Yakuza," before having Lao Guai plug her ass. I mean, it's the most realistic outcome, but you'd expect Makoto, after learning everything, to not make such a stupid fucking move. 10 out of 10 writing, let's get to the final chapter. The final chapter is a little confusing given that it keeps on switching between Kiryu and Majima, but I'll try to make the best sense of it. Kiryu's side winds up starting with Sarah just wanting to make sure that things can die down and that Shibusawa and Dojima can rampage, since no one knows that Makoto is still alive but them. But since the Dojima family are trying to purge any non-loyalists, well, the Kazuma family and Kiryu are on the chopping block. This also means we get the final boss fight against Kuze, a character with nothing but his pride keeping him going. And you know what? Now's the time we're gonna talk about his voice actor and likeness, but you know how these games go. So we're going to devote this part to talking about Hitoshi Ozawa. Now, you may expect me to say that Ozawa is someone with a rather storied acting career, and yeah, no shit he is. He's appearing in this game. But the more interesting thing about him is just how wholesome he is. It is amusing in the best way to, well, see that the man who plays Kuze is like the polar opposite of Kuze. Like, Let's start with his Instagram account, which I could only use so much of because I don't have one. But a lot of it's the guy living his best life, and it's just genuinely the most heartwarming thing. More importantly, though, are the cat photos. Oh, I could only get two, but they're so cute. Oh, baby. Choco, you're giving me a weird look. And you know what? It's June at the time of recording this line, so I'll give you one of those stories. It's not gonna be the one about, I'm not even gonna say the most well-known story with the trans girl involving Ozawa. No. But there is an overall wholesome story about Ozawa realizing that he was in love with the trans girl. In fact, so much that he considered it for 16 years. And while in the end it doesn't seem to have worked out, they do still seem to, from what context I can glean, share some sort of friendship. As he does state during the interview that she still stays at his house every time she's in Tokyo. But hey, there's your heckin' Pride Month stuff for ya. But the point just goes to show that almost anything I could find on Ozawa is just wholesome beyond belief. And you know what? Good on ya, guy. You played a hell of a character with Kuze, too. Regardless, once he goes down, he just spills the beans on Shibusawa's plan. That he purposely made sure that Makoto didn't die so he could learn where the consortium was. As well as warning Kiryu that he's about to step into the murkiest shit with regards to being a Yakuza. Given that the rest of the series exists, Kiryu just goes ahead anyways. Majima's start to the final chapter, on the other hand, just begins with pure catharsis. He beats the ever-loving daylights out of the punks that kicked him while he was down at his worst, as well as succinctly telling Segawa to fuck off, and that if anyone so much as touches Makoto again, he's going to fucking obliterate them. And as we near the end of the story, with Majima storming the Dojima family offices and Kiryu going to intercept the Dojima thugs, let me thank you all for your patience, both with listening to me ramble and with me getting this video out. Is it a bit early? Yeah, but you've been watching this for an hour and a half at least. A thing I would still rather thank at any point in time. Regardless, if you're playing the game, well, welcome to the climax. A ship being assailed and a revisit to the Dojima family offices.
Welcome to the fantasy zone. Get ready.
It's an onslaught of having to fight thug after thug after thug, trying to break through into the cruise ship. And just when you break through and you have Kiryu staring down Shibusawa, bang, it's fucking Majima time! Yeah, it's a repeat of Kiryu's first area, but there's just something satisfying about Majima plowing through smarmy Dojima's thugs. It's just, mwah, chef's kiss. So for this sort of case, yeah, I'm fine with the reuse. At the end of it all is a boss fight with the only Dojima family lieutenant we've not fought yet, Awano, which, seeing Majima, someone that he knows of given his infamous banishment from the family, kind of gets him excited. It gets his blood pumping and it gets him itching for a fight. And there is at least one good moment in that fight I gotta let play. Regardless, after that fight, Majima and Awano share a post-fight heart-to-heart, where Majima says lately he's seen people who have lived like utter idiots, but it's made them the finest people that he's ever seen, even if they died like idiots. In the end, Owano chooses to go out like a crazy idiot himself, taking bullets for Majima's sake. This leads to Majima's final boss fight against Lao Guai, because why the fuck would Sohei Dojima ever get his hands dirty? It really does just become a single traumatized lad, just beats the shit out of Asia's most expensive hitman, as Dojima calls him. Though, with Sarah making sure that Majima doesn't get plugged with a bullet. Because of course, fucking Dojima tries to kill Majima while his back is turned, and fucking misses. That makes us switch back to Kiryu's side of the conflict, where he's face to face with Shibusawa. With Shibusawa revealing that his motivations are really quite petty. He's a man that only wants one thing, glory, complete with the fancy title of the Dragon of Dojima. Before we go on though, I do want to comment on Shibusawa's voice actor and likeness. And I'm going to be pretty brief on this one, as I couldn't find anything quirky like I could with Riki or Ozawa. But I do at least want to give him a mention in this video and just say he knocks it out of the park as Shibusawa. He just nails the performance of just this power-hungry, glory-hungry little schemer that you can't wait to deck. The type that takes the cloak and dagger approach. And man, I can't believe I got to the final chapter without talking about music. I'm not too familiar with too much else of Hidenori Shoji's other works. Like, sure, maybe F-Zero GX, but I'm not a Monkey Ball fan, so... But his work on this specific series is phenomenal to me. From stuff like the introduction of Majima with Customer's Creed, up to bangers like Kuze's themes, Pledge of Demon and Oath of Enma. And then you have the final boss theme, Two Dragons, just this build-up to a perfect track to end the game on. It's all so good, and if you have a way to listen to this soundtrack, I recommend it wholeheartedly. But the fun thing about Shibusawa's fight is that he fights with variations on Kiryu's own styles. It's not a mirror match by any means, but both of their fighting styles kind of take root in the same way. With him starting with an equivalent of the Rush style, then going to an equivalent of the Beast style, and then going to an equivalent of the Brawler style. It's a genuinely fun boss fight, and it's why I'm dedicating time to talk about it. Though, when the fight ends, would you believe me if I still said there was a decent chunk of things to go through? Let's marathon it, okay? So it starts with Shibusawa trying to goad Kiryu into killing him, but Nishiki shows up and, hey, don't cross that line. Once you do it, you can't come back. If we have to, we'll cross it together, bro. Trust me, bro. And then it switches over to Majima about to kill both Lao Guai and Dojima, but Sarah convinces him not to, saying that there is no way Makoto could ever repay him for that. Before informing Majima that Makoto has in fact signed the law over to the Nikkyo Consortium and that it would be better to just let Dojima squirm like the rat bastard he is and throw Lao Guai into the hole where he was kept for years. Majima goes back to Shimano's office and delivers the message and the gun, but because he's meeting with the head of the Omi Alliance, he instead decides to cover his tracks by just shooting the head of the Omi Alliance instead of Majima or himself. And since the Nikkyo Consortium got the empty lot, Sarah gets named as the new chair of the Tojo clan, with Dojima squirming like hell like the rat bastard he is. Kiryu goes back to the Dojima family, making Nishiki think that, he's gone fucking mental, but Kiryu's fine with it, as well as just giving another dig at Kiryu's fashion sense. Segawa, on the other hand, prepares to let Majima loose into the world, as well as just snarking about the fact that Majima has just embraced being a crazy guy. And of course, because the Omi Alliance head died on his watch, the rest of the Omi Alliance comes down for his blood. And because of how prequels work, nobody can either be alive or about whenever the rest of the games happen. So of course Segawa was gonna get fucking plugged. And then Majima makes sure that someone who has the hots for Makoto is going to treat her right because, he just went through hell for that woman. as well as a post-credit scene showing that Majima in fact fixed the clock of Makoto's. Or paid someone to do it, one of the two. We're almost done here. And finally, before my lungs fucking give out, the game ends on the meme. So here we are, finally at the end of this behemoth. And there's a bunch I left out, like, I have made it clear. I think you should play Yakuza 0. But as much as the production goes awry, with the funny part this time being that I had accidentally turned Vegas into a RAM bomb, at least until my upgrade, but that's getting off track. I always enjoy coming back to the Yakuza games, and there's a lot of them that I can go back to. But with regards to Zero, the only thing I do want to mention is that there was a Vita companion app in Japan, which usually I jump for joy at the chance to use my PS Vita, but this video has gone on long enough, and I'd rather lump it in with some other interesting portable Yakuza stuff. Though, another thing I will note from my own personal experience is that these games tend to work really well with the Steam Deck. So, if you want another potential reason to get it, there you go. Until then, I'm just going to sign off for this video and hope that you all enjoyed it.